plenty of seats down towards the front, in the center. Lots of places to sit. My name is Dr. Berna Marina Eric. I'm the director of the Evelyn Lincoln Institute for Ethics and Society, and I would like to welcome all of you to our panel this evening entitled Economic Ethics and the Common Good. And thank you all for joining us. Elias was established in the fall of 2008 through a generous grant from Emily and John Costigan. Emily Costigan is a 1964 graduate of Mercyhurst College. The institute is named in honor of her mother, Evelyn Jacobson Lincoln, image up there, who graduated from Mercyhurst in 1930. The first co-directors of Elias were Dr. Daniel McPhee in Religious Studies and Dr. Kevin Sullivan in Philosophy. They developed the Distinguished Speaker Series and roundtables focusing in three primary areas: socially responsible business practices, science and emerging technologies, ecology, and sustainability. While the Institute has broadened its scope, these three areas remain at the heart of the Institute's work. Before I introduce tonight's panelists, I'd like to thank Sharon Sisko and all the staff, the event staff, as well as the marketing department for all their assistance in putting together tonight's program. I'd also like to thank Mercyhurst University, President Victor, Provost Roberts, Dean Riley Brown of the Hoffenmeyer College of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences, and Dean Ponsford of the Walker College of Business for their support of the Institute. And now just a little bit of background on the panel. The topic began with a conversation with John and Emily Costigan about the Vatican document at the heart of tonight's panel. In May, the Vatican published the document, I've practiced this so many times, Oeconomicae et Pecuniariae Quastiones, considerations for an ethical discernment regarding some aspects of the present economic financial system. The Costigans recommended a public panel in the document in order to explore the intersections of economics, religion, and ethics. In order to accomplish this goal, we have four panelists tonight. First, we have Professor Juan Arguez, who's an associate professor of economics in the Walker College of Business here at Mercyhurst. He's a PhD in economics from the University of Notre Dame. Greg Baker is Mercyhurst Vice President for Mission, and he has a doctorate of ministry from Fordham University. Professor Richard McCarty is Associate Professor of Religious Studies in the Hoffenmeyer College at Mercyhurst. He has a PhD in ethics from the University of Iowa. And Professor Lena Schersko-Harned is Assistant Teaching Professor of Political Science and Senior Policy Analyst at the Public Policy Fund at Penn State University, Barron College. Her PhD in Political Science is from the University of Pittsburgh. I'll allow the panelists to introduce themselves a little bit more and give a little bit of background on their work. They'll each have about 10 minutes to present. I'll be moderating tonight's panel. So we'll begin with some brief remarks from each of the panelists to set the foundation for our discussion. Then I'll ask a series of pre-arranged questions for the panelists. And finally, we will open up the panel to questions and comments from the audience. And now I will turn over the discussion to our panelists. Okay.
Thank you. That introduction is including the 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Then I'm not introducing myself. I know many of you, you have taken my classes. I'm Dr. Arguez. I teach macro, micro, intermediate, advanced, all kinds of courses here. I'm from Southeast Mexico. I'm from Merida. And it's a beautiful city. If you have ever a chance to go study abroad, go study there. So I'm going to start by just showing you some of the quotes from the document that I believe is very important. And by the way, if you have a chance, I think there was a link on one of the emails that you received. There was a link to the document. Read it. It's actually a beautiful document. And so I just took some quotes from there to address basically those comments in the presentation. The idea is that there has been economic growth in the last few decades. Since the 1980s, our economy has almost tripled. Yet, the level of income inequality has increased since that time too. So basically, the Catholic Church is asking, what is it that is happening? Why is it happening? Is there something that we can do about it? Meaning, could it be that we have to have some ethical component, that we have to regulate the system for the system to work for everybody, for the system to work for the common good? So that's basically what we're going to analyze in our class. So first I thought we should address whether it is true that even though our economy has increased so much, that our economy has grown so almost tripled in the last 40 years, whether income inequality has increased. So I thought, let's just take a few statistics and look at income inequality. This first table, I know is table and numbers, and some of you are going to say we see many of those in your class, but it's important to actually address inequality in our country. Not many people know about it. And we have in this table, if we focus on 2015, the first columns, because it's similar in 2016, if we look at the first column, well, actually, yeah, let's use the first column. It's just money income. What they're doing here is dividing the population in fifths, a quintal. So 20% of the population represents a quintal. The lowest quintal would be the poorest of the poor, the poorest 20% in our country. And that is showing the percentage of our national income that goes to that 20% of the population. So we have that the lowest quintal, the poorest of the poor, live in our country with only 3.1% of our national income. If we go to the top 20% receives more than 51%, more than half our national income goes to the top 20%. If we actually go to the top 5%, they actually live with 20% of our national income. So it seems that this is happening. There's more dramatic numbers. This, by the way, is not a liberal view. Many people start talking about that now on TV, that if you look at these numbers, you are a liberal. No, this is economics. We're just looking at the actual data. And this one is actually looking at the percentage of our income, national income, that goes to the top 1% of the population. This actually starts in the 1920s, before the Great Depression, and we had that back then almost 20% of our national income went to the top 1% of the population. That actually declined. This actually scared people in our country. And we passed many laws, like income taxes, for instance, progressive income taxes, to address this issue. So eventually, the level of income going to the top 1% started to go down. It's not that our economy was not performing. It's just that we were sharing more of that economic growth with the rest of the population, instead of just going to the top 1%. But since the 1980s, we have a new trend. Suddenly, more and more of our economic growth started to go to the top 1%. This graph now is not talking about income, it's talking about wealth. Now it's the accumulation, if you will, of savings that can take many forms. Could be just savings, could be stocks, could be bonds. The point is that this is the wealth in our nation, and it's comparing how much wealth the 0.1%, not the 1%, the 0.1% of the population holds relative to 90% of the population. And again, before the Great Depression and during that period of time, the top 0.1% actually had more wealth than 90% of the population. That actually declined again. We actually passed laws like the estate taxes to actually prevent this rapid accumulation of income by a certain percentage of the population. But it seems that again, since the 1980s, something changed. And again, wealth started to go to the top 1% at a much rapid rate than it did for the rest of the population. In fact, the share of income going to the bottom 90% of the population, which definitely includes all of us. The wealth going to the bottom 90% started to decline since then, and as a share. And the share going to the 0.1% started to go up. Many people argue, maybe this is happening in other countries. So I thought, let's introduce, so we know what we're talking about, or what they talk about in the document. Could this be happening in other countries? It is happening. In fact, inequality has been increasing in other countries, but not at the rate that has increased in our country. So this is comparing our country with other countries. Those bars that you're looking at represent the Gini coefficient. I'm not going to get into the technicalities of it, but the higher the Gini coefficient, the higher the level of inequality. And we're comparing ourselves with the rest of the advanced economies. We are in red. And as you can see, we have a more unequal distribution of income than the rest of our peers' advanced economies. So it's something that is happening here. In Economics of Poverty, that some of you, I recognize your faces, did take with me. We talk about, okay, it seems like through surveys, we, the population in the US, we actually believe that income inequality is not such a bad problem or not such a big issue as long as we have opportunity. So let's see if we have opportunity. If you are born at the bottom, do you have a chance to move up? Because if that is the case, meaning that's the American dream, if that is the case, then inequality is not such a big deal. But it seems, given recent statistics, that that's not as easy as it probably was, let's say, during the 1950s and 60s. Now, if you're born at the bottom quintile, there's a 70% chance that you're not going to even make it to the middle class. So what is the issue here? That the economic system is working in a way that is concentrating income and wealth in a few hands, and those that are not members of that group don't have a good chance of moving into the group. So I said, okay, could it be a problem then with economic theory? Many of you have taken economics, but in case you haven't, economic theory is divided into branches. Microeconomics, that looks at individual issues in a specific market, and macroeconomics, that looks at the whole economy. Microeconomics actually is based on very strong assumptions. In our principles classes that some of you have taken, we start by saying we are going to assume that we are selfish. Believe it or not, that is something that is needed mathematically. We don't have to assume that we're selfish, but it's easy for people to relate to it. We're going to act just looking for our own interest. This actually is Spark trying to prove what Adam Smith said hundreds of years ago. But the point is that by assumption, our model is built on the premise that we are selfish and we only act looking for our own interest. We do the same with firms because we try to explain in microeconomics why firms do what they do. Why do they produce what they produce, at what price they sell it, and we actually assume that they're selfish too. That the only goal of the firm is to make a profit. But not only make profits, to make the maximum amount of profits available. I have to actually say it. When I'm teaching the class, I actually say, and it is true. Because that's what firms have. Their objective is to make a profit, and the maximum profit they can. So the actual economic theory does a good job explaining that behavior. But this economic theory is based on premises where we are selfish. This is based on premises when the only goal is satisfaction, the only goal is profits. And why could that be a problem? As we're going to see in a second, we create economic theories, we economists, but then policymakers use those theories to justify their policies. So basically macroeconomics then is based on this assumption that we're all selfish and that we need free markets. Because it's, given those quotes, it's only through free markets that society is best off. So I said, okay, let's look at macroeconomics. Maybe in macroeconomics we're doing better. And in macroeconomics, just so you know, it was actually created as a response to the Great Depression. Microeconomics was the predominant economic theory. That's what everybody studied. And microeconomics said the government should never intervene. That's what free markets mean. It was a response to mercantilism. So the idea was during the Great Depression that the government shouldn't do anything. But we were getting worse and worse and worse. The crisis was getting worse, and people were starving, losing their jobs. So these other economists created a new branch, macroeconomics, that said we actually could use the government to save everybody. That's how macroeconomics started. But eventually, somehow, it evolved into having some specific goals. The goal of macroeconomics is not the well-being of individuals. The goal of macroeconomics is to understand how the economy functions and find a way for that economy to grow. It does not explain macroeconomics. In fact, it does not even study who gets to enjoy economic growth. It's just how and what can we do to achieve economic growth. But not only economic growth with low inflation and with low unemployment. So macroeconomics does not address either. Our well-being is not looking for the common good. It's simply assuming that if an economy grows, everybody's better off. But we have seen, given the statistics, that our economy has been growing, but not everybody is as well off as other groups in society. Is this making sense so far? Yeah? So I said, okay, economic theory actually gets many things right. I'm not going to be just a critic of economics because actually it gets many things the right way and analyzes things the way I believe they should. But there is a problem with economics in general. We are trained economists to actually just have positive statements. Many of you that take our classes here, Dr. Yarsin and I, our courses have known that we don't tell you what is right, what is wrong. That's not the realm of economics. We say that we just analyze what it is and explain it. So ethics is not part of economics. We don't make normative statements. This is right, this is wrong. We just say this is it. Meaning, if the policymakers are going to use our theories to implement policies, they are not getting some guidance from economics about how to implement the policies or what could be the repercussions, ethical repercussions of the policies that they implement. All they're thinking about, or they're using as a justification, is a theory that says we need free markets, meaning the government should intervene. We need free markets, so we shouldn't regulate the market. We should not even pay attention to what is happening because these selfish, rational individuals are going to make decisions that will benefit them. But as they benefit themselves, they will benefit society. So the point was then that I said, if this is true, then what the document is saying is making sense. We probably need a new economic system. We probably need to get involved and actually not only study economics, but include as part of their economic theories what are the ethical repercussions of the conclusions that we're reaching. Is this, do I still have time? Yeah? No? Past the time? Right. 1 minute. So basically the idea was then, okay, economic theory is correct, but it seems like the church, the Catholic Church is asking that either we have to include all those concepts, the common good, how our policies will actually influence not just economic growth measured by GDP, but who gets to enjoy that growth. If we get to include that in our theory, then our theories will benefit society and not just the economy.
Thank you, Dr. Arquez. We're going to turn now to Dr. Baker.
Do I need to touch anything on this? That's better. Thank you, Dr. Arrett. I would love to respond to some of the things that Dr. Arquez just introduced, but I'm going to try to stick to my comments. I should also point out that I'm no economist, which actually might be helpful for our context tonight, because some people would argue that puts me in the same boat with Pope Francis. Many people have sharply criticized him as not possessing a full understanding of global economics. What I can and will try to do is to lay out what Catholics claim as the basic principles and priorities that should undergird any economic system. I hope to show that Pope Francis's recent statement on the economy flows from a quite consistent development within Catholic social teaching stretching back to the late 19th century. It's an economic vision rooted in the common good and human dignity, with preference for those who are poor and most marginalized. The Industrial Revolution sparked rapid expansion of factories and rapid urbanization, and this brought with it new challenges. Many laborers found themselves in situations in which owners and managers of large industries claimed too much power to dictate the wages and working conditions of the labor force. In many cases, those managing these factories were more interested in profit. Workers needed ways to advocate for their rights, including the right to unionize. It also became clear that the poor were no longer embedded in smaller communities in which people might easily identify and support those who are poor. Rather, amidst urbanization, the poor were becoming increasingly anonymous and invisible to a busy world. Pope Leo XIII's seminal writings on Catholic social teaching emerged in response to the new inequities resulting from this increasing industrialization and urbanization. This led towards a more personalist view of economics. In the 1930s, Catholic philosopher Jacques Maritain referred to personalism as a humanism of incarnation, that is attention to the profound dignity of the human person in light of God who is made present in real people and through concrete human situations. Catholic social teaching began to cohere around what they call integral human development. This begins with the consideration of the assets that people already have on hand, which might include not only money, but property and homes, livestock, natural resources, and so forth. It moves to consider the systems and supports in place that either help to support people's flourishing or hinder it. And for Catholics, these questions of development are never individual questions. They're always relational and communal questions. With the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s, the Church sharpened its focus on looking at the real situations of development in the world in light of these core principles of human dignity already established. Pope John XXIII called for the reform of capitalism, arguing that people should never subordinate persons to blind market forces. The Second Vatican Council drew attention to the common good, defined as the sum of those conditions of social life which allow social groups and their individual members relatively thorough and ready access to their own fulfillment, end quote. Amidst rapid globalization, the church also became wary of an overly competitive international market. Pope Paul VI shifted the emphasis to politics as necessary for situations and for development, so making sure they served people's dignity. Council also introduced ecology, the environment, into the question of development and consumption. Our economic systems not only exploit the poor, but the earth itself. Then in the 1980s, John Paul II warned of the sins of craving for profit and hunger for power. Now, he had firsthand experience of and wariness of communism, and by extension was suspicious of socialism more broadly. Some began to wonder if this meant that capitalism was being baptized as the privileged system of the church. That depends. If capitalism means free creative markets that allow for private property, resulting in responsibility for the needs of production and free human creativity in the economic sector, then yes, capitalism seems to support an ideal Catholic economy. But if capitalism means a system in which there is no strong regulation or strong legal oversight to ensure that the system actually serves the human being and her dignity, then no, capitalism is not the best system. As John Paul II said, Catholic social doctrine is not a surrogate for capitalism. Capitalism needs a strong moral framework oriented towards the human good, the common good and human development, and it needs regulation. Continuing this line of thought, Economic Justice for All was a 1986 pastoral on Catholic social teaching in the U.S. economy, promulgated by the Catholic bishops of the United States. They contended that the market economy must be tempered by concern for human dignity and preferential option for the poor, that industrial expansion and technological progress must not be achieved at the expense of either the dignity of the laborer or the integrity of the environment. The bishop further argued that we need not just charity, but we need radical structural changes in government and financial institutions so that they more equitably distribute the profits resulting from labor. It's interesting that this was in the 80s, just as Dr. Arguez said this term really started to happen. Pope Benedict followed in his predecessor's thought. He affirmed that in the marketplace, people are always an end in themselves and never a means to an end. He places great responsibility on what he calls the political community for directing economic activity towards the common good. Great imbalances are produced, he writes, when economic action, conceived merely as an engine for wealth creation, is detached from political action, conceived as a means for pursuing justice through redistribution. Benedict called for a term he quips, which is redistributive justice. He claimed that governments must commit themselves to greater collaboration with one another to deal with the transnational integrated economy, as well as a stronger and reformed United Nations and other international economic institutions that govern finance as well. This brings us to Pope Francis. I will not try to pronounce his document from April 2017, but in it, it's significant to note it's co-written by the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, which is the Church's primary teaching body, and the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development. It comes from core Catholic social teachings, placing conversation with the arm of the Vatican, dealing with the most pressing challenges facing humanity, like human migration, sex trafficking, and the other things that Dicastery deals with. Francis places himself in line with Catholic social teaching, especially his predecessor, Benedict XVI, whom he cites in this document more than the previous 5 popes combined. The document begins by returning to early Catholic social teaching and the Church's concern for integral human development, saying that love for the integral good, inseparable from the love for the truth, is key to authentic development. He reiterates that an economy needs ethics, but not any ethics, a people-centered ethics, and that there's no exchange of goods as things. People are always in the mix. In fact, he goes so far to argue that no profit is legitimate, that 1, falls short of the objective of integral human development, 2, fails to account for the universal destination of goods, and 3 fails to function from a preferential option for the poor. Turning to the state of the world's economy, the document calls for greater regulation of markets and financial systems, saying that the economic crisis shows that they are not able to govern themselves and need a strong injection of morality and ethics. Notably, this document urges universities and schools of business to educate the next generation of business leaders about ethics and not just profits. Economics must be taught from the backdrop of how they serve the human person. This document warns of a reckless and amoral culture of waste. It goes on to express regret over what it calls a failed opportunity to correct the world's economic and financial systems. The recent crisis could have been a wake-up call. Instead, too many people have retreated to the types of self-serving practices that led to the crisis in the first place. For instance, this document references obsolete practices and financial criteria that remain unquestioned and or under-regulated within banking systems, such as the widespread practice of keeping offshore accounts. The recent financial crisis, the document says, could have been the occasion to develop a new economy more attentive to ethical principles and a new regulation of financial activities that would neutralize the predatory and speculative tendencies and acknowledge the value of the actual economy. The document also notes that tax avoidance is an unjust removal of money from the economy, and calls for a critical and responsible exercise of consumption and savings. The final point of the document is that money must serve the needs of people, never rule them, and selfishness causes everyone to pay a very high price. To summarize, and perhaps push the conversation forward, instead of privileging one economic system, the Catholic Church places at the center of all considerations the human person, her or his dignity, and the basic ability of all to flourish and become fully human. It places the common good and relationality, not individual liberties and privatized rights, at the center. I think this Catholic position poses tremendous challenges for those of us who have grown up in the logic of a free market, competitive, profit-based financial system. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Eric. Oeconomicae has one basic thesis. Money and financial systems ought to serve human well-being, and thus humans must not be made as instruments or cogs in the corporate machine for the sake of wealth itself. Supporting this view is an assertion that morality is grounded in an objective order. It is an assertion that the Church not only defends with moral theology, but also more broadly according to reason. Both are important to consider. On the one hand, Oeconomicae reflects Catholic natural law thinking that God has created human beings as social creatures, and as such, it is a precept of our God-given nature to create societies and to ensure that they are just, especially for the marginalized and the poor, as magisterial teaching demands. On the other hand, the Church can say that apart from natural law thinking or magisterial teaching, prudence, which is right reason itself, apprehends that we can only flourish as the kind of creatures that we are by attending to living and doing well, in a qualitative sense, which requires us to define, refine, and pursue justice in human relationships, and that we can promote such living and doing well across our cultural and religious differences by coming to terms with what reason reveals as necessary for human natural flourishing. Catholic thinking on human flourishing as a matter of social justice has certainly developed and refined itself over the centuries, but such Catholic teaching is multifaceted and not so easily categorized by American political or economic standards. For example, sometimes Catholic social teaching appears to follow a course that sounds much like liberty rights, the right to be left alone to pursue life, liberty, justice, property, happiness, and so forth. But at the same time, Catholic thinking demands that freedom is not best defined by the pursuit of our rational best self-interest, but according to the immutable truths of morality and religion that the Catholic Church claims to archive and champion. It is not disputable that financial markets, domestic or international, can do and have harmed human beings in real and substantial ways. Every economy benefits some, and every economy has sacrificed some. But the restoration of justice in an economy is not something that can be meaningfully fixed with a generic call to take care of each other through domestic and international regulations, though that plea seems so right. To that end, the structure of this Vatican statement needs an ethical analysis, not just a financial one, which may help us to articulate more specifically the problems and potential solutions regarding global economic justice. First, that Oeconomicae asserts the reality of an objective morality, that is a defensible claim. One does not have to be a Catholic apologist to agree that the concept of an objective morality is defensible. I do so, joining with other ethicists who approach morality from the perspective of critical realism. Critical realism is a theoretical perspective which advances the idea that our natural faculties allow us to apprehend the world, particular objects, and people as real, knowable, and relatable. With respect to ethics, critical realism seeks to uncover what actually leads to our flourishing on the basis of what common goods we can discern from critical reflection on human living. Lisa Sol-Cahill notes that from the perspective of critical realism, morality requires reasonable reflection on human existence, fine discrimination of goods whose possession truly constitutes happiness, and judgments about which activities lead to those goods and which do not. As a critical realist, there is nothing about the basic thesis of Oeconomicae that strains moral credulity. There is no reason to withhold a symbolic amen from the concept that financial systems ought to serve human well-being. It is a reasonable moral expectation, then, that humans must not be made as instruments or cogs in the corporate machine for the sake of wealth itself. But where Oeconomicae stumbles is in its methodological defense of that claim. Calls for global partnerships of financial regulation are entirely left here in the abstract, so much so that the description of a global harmony reads fictitious. We are dealing here with a global market in which some transnational corporations are benefiting from near-slave labor, child labor, lack of health regulations, and the like. So when certain American corporations tell us that they cannot compete well globally without scaling jobs back here, or by paying certain tax rates for the sake of the Republic and the general welfare of its people, they are admitting to a real problem, but they're also prioritizing fiscal reports over cardinal moral concerns. Namely, they are telling us that the progress of human rights, social welfare, and ecological regulation policies in countries like America limit their ability to compete financially elsewhere. Consider this. Recent corporate tax cuts in America were not primarily designed to benefit the worker, but to free the financial assets to American corporations in order to perform better on the global market. Now, we can call that greedy and selfish, and indeed sometimes it is. But without more financially nimble corporations, sooner or later American jobs are or can be lost at home. And that leaves us in but one of many moral quagmires. To call American corporations to increase worker pay at home and embrace environmental regulations may very well, in the bigger picture of global economy, result in the loss of corporations and jobs here, which then expands the circle of suffering and economic injustice here and abroad. At the very same time, a failure to take care of workers and the environment, whether here or elsewhere, is an absolute transgression of justice. Thus, the Church is not wrong to say that economic injustice is a pressing issue and one that we cannot ignore. However, its suggestion that the current globalization of the financial system requires a stable, clear, and effective coordination among various national regulatory authorities does not give us any indication of what that could possibly be. What is more, the Church does not adequately recognize in this document that even reformed systems are occupied by human beings whose penchant for greed will inevitably corrupt aspects of the economy until Christ returns. From the perspective of the Church, we are living in the already and the not yet of the kingdom of God. And thus we are left to respond to economic corruption, sin, and immorality, not with final solutions, but with heuristic ones that give some kind of presence to God's reign in our lives and in social systems. To that end, I believe that the call for financial chastisement is actually a call to embody radical charity, but therein is both the opportunity and the problem. There is no ethic of charity that in some way does not require a radical sacrifice of the self and a complete reimagining of institutions, and that includes the Catholic Church itself. For all 7 billion souls on this planet to be housed, fed, educated, and have access to health care would require some kind of redistribution of wealth that would demand much, not just of the wealthy and the 1%, but even of those who sound the call to chastity and charity itself. For example, in 2010, the National Center for Charitable Statistics found that the total expenditures in the United States on human services was $168 billion. In the same year, Catholic Charities reported $4.4 billion in charitable giving. That's good. However, after factoring in local, state, and federal dollars donated to or facilitated through Catholic charity programs, PolitiFact notes that the Church's contributions towards economic injustice in this country is actually a percentage in the single digits. Thus, while no one can deny and should not deny that the Catholic Church contributes a significant amount of money and work in the task of charity, the need of charity is greater than what is given to or through the Church. And thus, that great hole of need can only be filled by the additional resources of charity through greater sacrifice. The Church, too, must answer that call. One aspect of which would be restructuring church finances. For example, although controversial, I don't think anyone could morally disagree that many hungry people locally or throughout this Commonwealth could be fed with those church funds that have been spent to resist changing laws concerning the statutes of limitations for clergy sexual abuse victims. Returning millions of dollars from political lobbying to local charity, that would not eradicate poverty, but it would keep our neighbors in need warm, and it would keep them well fed. Radical charity would also mean a greater sacrifice of giving from those who donate to the Catholic Church or to other charitable bodies more generally, which would further mean a restructuring of material and financial goods among the laity or just the citizenry. But that is not a simple solution either. For example, many Americans live in homes that are spatially bigger than what we need to survive. We could sell those, distribute the proceeds, and that would seem like the path of Christian charity. After all, sell all that you have and give to the poor, then come follow me, are the words of Christ himself. But homes are not simply living spaces. They are financial investments for a future that may or may not include the safety nets of Social Security and Medicare. Giving more of our finite resources broadly to global poverty might be good, but it also means giving less to our immediate circle of family, partners, and friends, and taken to the extreme, that puts ourselves in the zone of poverty for the sake of charity, which then requires someone else to pick up our need from their wealth. If it sounds like I'm painting the picture as grim, I really am. If it sounds like I'm asking the Catholic Church to do more, that is also true. The Vatican's call to radical charity appears to exceed what they are currently given, which means they too must be a part of the solution. And ideally, the institution of the Church would demonstrate what that sacrifice of radical charity looks like at the level of the Vatican, in dioceses, in parishes, and in individual Catholic lives. Virtue is modeled no other way. That said, if I were to offer a solution to the problem, it would be that the hierarchical structure of the Church and much of our society can be part of the problem. We're looking at the problem all at once, which can paralyze even the most of compassionate people. By contrast, local solutions meet actual needs, which is why perhaps the model for charity we can look to first is not the Vatican, but to religious orders, especially women religious, who have shown us rather consistently what it looks like to live in community, not only in cloister, but in active engagement with the larger community, not only urging us, but leading us and working with us to meet the needs on our streets, as the Benedictines and the Sisters of Mercy so wonderfully do. If we start local to solve the problem, we not only follow the example of Catholic women religious, but we would also be following the insight of Thomas Aquinas, who said that the order of charity is not top-down, but local. Practicing charity as a relational dynamic with those that we share life with, not reducing charity to well-wishing for those we may never meet. When something like the Thomistic order of love is practiced everywhere, the needs of the world are met. This order of love locally seems at the present the best practical step we can take to overcome economic injustice, even as we also work regionally, nationally, and internationally to reform systems and leverage resources to those most in need, especially for those who have no local options. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. McCarty, and finally we'll turn to Dr. Churchko-Harnett.
Thank you, Dr. Eric. Thank you, dear fellow panelists. You set me up. All right, so I'm a political scientist on this panel, and I realize very well why is it that Dr. Eric put me very in. Because my discipline is where the proverbial ethical rubber meets the hard economic reality of, that's where things get interesting. So on one hand, give you a full disclosure, right? I'm an international relations scholar, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit, and a comparative politics scholar, so I'm going to talk to you a little broadly about sort of international implications of this document. And, in full disclosure also, I'm not a student of ethics or religion, and definitely not Catholicism. I studied Marxism, not Catholicism, in virtue of my upbringing. So for me, reading this document was very interesting how many things resonated, but not from perspective of, again, Catholic ethic, but rather of what I know as Marxist teachings, right? Which is a remarkable thing to me and sort of floored me a little bit. And you've probably heard some of these overtones from my colleagues as they were discussing and offering their comments. What struck me in this document, and I think something that we sort of need to keep in mind, is that Pope Francis is offering a critique not just to the economic system of capitalism, right? He's offering a critique to a very important policy practice and theory that is called economic development. Development more broadly, right, is this very, pardon the tautology, but yeah, a very developed field within international relations, international policy, that has to do not just with economic development per se, but a little broader, and it has grown immensely. So, as part of my remarks, and I'm going to try to keep it as brief as possible, I want to just give you a little taste of what development is all about, where it comes from, and what's wrong with it, and why Francis is criticizing it, right? And sort of what can be done with it. And I'm really happy that some of the comments that my colleagues already have made really going to resonate with what I'm going to say as well, but again, from a politics perspective. So development as a theory, development as a practice, really comes into existence sort of on a global scale right after World War II. And it shouldn't surprise you, right? World War II, world is devastated, Europe is ruined, it's basically leveled to the ground, and the colonies are over, right? The colonial rule is over. So all of a sudden, you know, that those who are left standing, basically the United States, look around the world and say, oh wow, world is really like not a happy place right now, and we have something we can do about this. So development theory really is a sort of a brainchild of very important liberal theory, liberal perspective on politics and sort of this peace and prosperity that comes out of the United States in 1945. A lot of things come in that era with the development policy as well, and that is the entire world order as we know it, the United Nations, the Bretton Woods institutions, the World Bank, the IMF, right, the lending facilities, the European Union as we know it, right, all rise out of this era, and all of them are tied to the concept of development that is also that liberally informed idea, but the liberalist theory. Some of it is what Dr. Arguez already talked to you about, right, and that is that economic component of free markets, right, deregulation of markets, allowing for free movement of labor and capital between the borders, and sort of the driving of that development by the selfish individuals trying to maximize their profits, which you guys will know as the trickle-down economics. The thing is, right, that development also brings with it another component of this institutional development as well that places a great emphasis on also development of democracies. And guess what? For the longest time in the policy world, we were convinced, right, that democracy and capitalism go hand in hand. Like, this is it. You needed those individual freedoms along with economic freedoms, and that is how sort of you've driven the success. And the thing is that it's not surprising, right? Not to be blasphemous, but we always try to create the world in our own image, right? If it works for us, therefore it's going to work for the rest of the world. The United States did basically the same thing at the same time in 1945 and 1949. And it worked. Looking at Europe, right? Remember, in the 1940s, one of the biggest things that the United States done to implement the development policy is turn to destroy Europe and introduce the Marshall Plan. And the Marshall Plan worked wonders, right? Again, because you already had sort of that prior experience with democracies, prior experience with capitalist economies. So pumping in money into Europe worked, right? Opening the markets. Why? Because Europe already was industrialized. Europe knew that, had the know-how. And for the United States, it was relatively easy. And by the way, sometimes my students find it very surprising when I tell them that the Marshall Plan to date is the biggest $8 developmental package that the United States has distributed ever? It is, right? Ever. That was the biggest thing. Which, keep that in mind, I'm going to come back to that point. So remember that Europe was the biggest recipient of that developmental aid coming out of the United States. So, in the United States with Europe, it was easy. There is also cultural ties there, right? After all, there is a ton of connections culturally between Europe and the United States. And of course, the United States, it was not leveled after World War II. It was relatively easy to sort of, and the need was there to transport the European markets into feasible and functional markets, because transforming factories from producing tanks to refrigerators, and you need the market to sell them refrigerators to somebody, Europeans like them, right? Okay, so since that model worked in Europe, throughout the Cold War, the United States also now has a wonderful ally in that developmental model, and it kind of worked. So why aren't we doing this all over the world as well? So let's take that model, let's take this cookie cutter, and go around this world and start making capitalist democracies everywhere. Because that is the liberal sort of approach, right? Again, it's not the liberal, the Democratic Party liberal thing, but the classical liberal theory kind of thing, right? Where democracies don't fight each other, the trickle-down economics, the selfishness of driving that growth. So the problem, of course, with that is that, guess what? It didn't work. And what it did in the meantime, it created a new set of horrible business practices, horrible, ethically questionable, economically mind-boggling, and politically with serious implications, politically practices and implications. So first and foremost, on a very basic level, what did we do with the developmental theory? We turned to the world, the media, and we said, okay, check this out. We can actually divide the world in a tripartite system based on their development. So guess what? We're going to have the first world, the developed, the second world, those commies that sort of kind of trying to figure out what their world is all about, and then the rest of them, the underdeveloped. And think about the connotation of underdeveloped. I'm not going to bring up, what the heck, I am going to bring up. Remember last year the president referred to certain countries as whole countries? Yeah, where's this coming from? This is that kind of connotation of that underdeveloped world that somehow is lesser than the rest. And with that come, of course, very serious implications on all fronts. How do we solve this? Well, there's a whole ton of ways that this development can be approached, right? We can possibly, start developing, invest through investment, start developing that market economy. Well, therein lies a problem. Investment is hard in places that are politically unstable. Investments are hard in places that are highly agricultural and not developed in terms of industry. And guess what? If you were going to start talking about free and open markets to compete, and Dr. Argyes, I'm sure, can back me up on this, to compete with agricultural economy against industrial economy is a fool's errand and impossible to develop. And therefore, the economic model is just not going to work. So investing is very hard. Trying to offer the competition, of course, is going to be also very difficult. And of course, then you run into the protectionist policies in part of the developed world, right? Like the European Union that likes to do that common agricultural policy when it protects its own farm workers, right? Half of the European budget goes into subsidizing the farmers of Europe. So what happens then to the rest of the world, right? To those developing countries who are agricultural and cannot compete for the life of them in European markets, right? So much for free markets, they closed off to them. Corruption, right? Development and its implications has led to a tremendous amount of corruption, because you can also start talking about that investment and how do you invest, how do you sort of find who the investors are, how do you find the protection for your investment. Well, you start dealing with corrupt politicians in these developing nations, right, in order to sort of secure your investment, even if you want to go that way. Or else, loans. Loans are a fantastic way of making corruption, of course correction. Who pays the loans that the government takes out from IMF? It's not the government du jour, it's the generations that come. It's every citizen of that country, right? And guess what? The people who take out those loans, they're not concerned about paying them off. And very frequently, that money is not getting spent on what it's supposed to be spent. It ends up in offshore. It ends up in Swiss bank account, right? It ends up paying for somebody's golden statue. So that is a phenomenal issue that goes with that development system. Dr. McCarthy talks also about charity. Charity is also problematic. It is part of the developmental package. And right, it's hard to criticize something that comes out of people's best intentions, but charities can be fantastically misleading, and they can erode the very foundation of development on the ground. So to give you a very good example, there's this instance in Haiti. There was a shortage of eggs, right? And this wonderful church in the Midwest found out and said, look, we're just going to collect eggs and ship them all to Haiti. Well, guess what? At the same time, there was a Haitian hen farmer who was invested everything he had into start producing these eggs, but he got priced out of the market by free eggs because you can't compete with free. Next year, the church turned around and started sending socks to some other countries, but they ruined this man's business. So the development theory, right, as it goes on, right, it has been reimagined. It has faced its problems. And in political science, again, there's plenty of work that is done on figuring out how to move it forward. And one thing that is highly recommended now, of course, and the studies show that this local approach is absolutely key into fostering the kind of development that is takes into account human dignity of those whom we're trying to develop without classifying them as somehow lesser and giving them an opportunity of participating in that development. And of course, to take into account the human rights of not only this generation, but generations to come, whether it's through sustainability or other efforts. So I'm sure you guys will have questions, and I'm looking forward to this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Schuster-Harnett. So we have a few planned questions in order to get the panelists talking with each other. And we'll start with the question about the economists themselves. Have economists and economic theories tried to address issues related to the dignity of the person and the common good? And if they haven't, should they? And how would they do that?
I guess the correct answer, and it's actually a very fast answer, is we don't. You cannot talk in economic theory about something that is not part of what you're analyzing. So if the common good, the preference for the poor, the dignity of the person is not something you are studying, then your theory will not include not the policies that emanate from that theory. That doesn't mean that there are not economic studies that actually measure the well-being of individuals. For instance, this is not mainstream economic theory. It wasn't definitely in the 1940s and 1950s, but it did become more known by the 80s and 90s. Studies that started to show why some nations are more advanced. Once we started to be able to manage more data, we started to discover what actually leads to economic development different from our original views. But we're still not talking about the dignity of the person. We're still not talking about the common good. We're just measuring things using statistics. And through the statistics, we cannot include in those statistics ethics. That does not mean, and this is important to note, that economic theory, even though pretends to be just about positive statements, actually those positive statements do have ethical implications. I'm going to use an example of something that you guys mentioned a second ago. One of the reasons, not the main reason, but one of the reasons why income inequality in the US has increased since the 1980s is the implementation of Repercussions. Those that the macroeconomics know, that we call it supply side economics. One of my roommates, this is a true story, one of my roommates from grad school actually was an economic historian, and he actually found letters between the authors of the theory, those that were promoting the theory, when they actually said that they were going to measure the success of the theory, not by how good it actually performs in terms of describing economic processes,
but how much they can change the political system. So the economic theory they develop and they publish to the world is supposed to be just a positive statement. If you do this, this could happen. But what they were actually planning had ethical perspectives. They were trying to change the world, reduce taxes to the rich, and pay for the debt that normally is created by the poor. So that does have an ethical component, but it's not part of the theory. Does that make any sense?
Absolutely.
You want to?
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to that as well. So one of the interesting things here that was mentioned by Dr. Baker, I think a little earlier also, that right again, why 80s, 90s? That did Catholicism basically give its blessing to capitalism in the wake of the collapse of the USSR? Kind of, right? The Francis Fukuyama whole end of history and stuff. But at the same time, right, these economic theories, right, they are theories, they are tools. And I guess this is where, again, the politics really comes into place and policy comes into play. Let me give you a little story. When USSR collapsed, right, this was a command economy. So this was not just a political transformation, but a huge economic transformation. So the huge question was, what do we do? How do we take this gigantic machine that used to be state-owned economy, where everybody was employed in just gigantic social welfare net, just collapsed, and you transform this into a free market economy? This is an unbelievable task. And of course, the Chicago School has its own thought about this, right? Complete liberalization. Let everything go. And the Chicago School representatives like Jeffrey Sachs turned up in Eastern Europe and said, dudes, we know what you gotta do. Just liberalize everything, let the prices rise if they need to, right? Let the supply-demand work itself out. And they called it shock therapy. And shock therapy was precisely that. You shock the system. And those who survive, survive. Those who don't, don't. Imagine the political implications of that. This means that grannies, children, poor, in any way disabled, they got not only the fuzzy end of the lollipop, they got completely destroyed in this effort, right? So that's the kind of stuff that, right, economic theory informs us, but how we make that decision then, of course, is going to, in politics, we apply that, right? It behooves us then as policymakers to consider those implications and how we're going to live with ourselves moving forward. Because, right, it's not just ethical questions, very practical questions. Why Russians love Papa Putin? Because Putin is not shock therapy. Putin was antithesis to shock therapy. Nobody wants to go to the 90s.
So looking at the document itself and other similar documents, has the Vatican been influential in reshaping international policy and discourse in the past? And how influential do you think the recent statement might be?
I think that's hard to answer it from my own American lens, as far as how these are received. I suspect who some of the major world players that they had in mind as they wrote this document. I suspect Francis, who has concern for what we call the developing world and the problems attached to that was part of it. But I think, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought here. Same question.
Has the Vatican been influential in reshaping international policy and discourse in the past? And how influential would the recent statement be?
I'm just going to say in short, I'm not sure how many people take the Vatican seriously as a world political player to speak to these kinds of realities. I'm a bit skeptical. We've certainly seen in the U.S. church, the church is losing a bit of its moral authority and struggling to hold on to that. I think in as much as it influences the individuals, and certainly we could unpack people who claim to be Catholic in U.S. politics, would claim, and whether they choose to listen to the Pope or not would be a fascinating study, person by person. Those who find convenient claims will jump to the Pope's side. Those who find the Pope to be frustrating seem to just dismiss him. So, you know, at least the American experience was kind of a cherry picking of what we would choose to listen to.
Well, I have to admit that I don't expect many global leaders or economists to respond well to this particular document. I do think that in the history of, if you're talking about economy, religion, and social systems, while something like liberation theology is certainly not a Vatican statement, I think that one of the great gifts of the Catholic Church is a communal attitude, and to think not just about me, but about we. And if you go back into Central America in the 70s and 80s, you find that Catholic churches became in many ways communities unto their own in order to resist the capitalistic regimes that we were supporting. And I think that when Catholic communities allied themselves with Marxist guerrillas, that was not a statement so much on what type of economic theory they agree with, but actually valuing the person and protecting each other. And there, I think some of the gifts of the church came through in unexpected ways, and I'm sure that we could see that beginning on a local level, how particular Catholics have embodied the care for the person through the economic systems or resisting as they can.
Yeah, just a couple of words I want to say on this topic. So, again, not the scholar of Catholicism, but again, what I've seen in my study of politics and international relations, one instance rings very true to me when a statement by a Catholic Pope was tremendously important and influential. And it wasn't influencing the leaders, it was a message toward a very specific demographic of the faithful. And of course I'm talking about John Paul II in his address towards the popes, towards Eastern Europe. That was a fantastically empowering. So I am wondering to what degree these words coming from Argentine Pope addressed towards, again, exactly those nations, to what degree that is not the message so much for the powerful of this world, for the corporations of this world, but rather to the underprivileged, the disenchanted, to tell them, I hear you, you're not alone, and it is a problem, and we recognize it, and you have the power, and you have the backing of the biggest dude up there in my presence, right? So that could be an empowerment at a very grassroots level rather than elite.
So I have a series, I have a giant list of questions that I can ask the panel, but what I would like to do at this point is open up the floor from the audience. What kinds of questions do you all have for the panel based on what they have said tonight?
So I know, like, in referencing economic development and how the U.S. and, like, Western powers have enforced, by Western I mean white Western nations, because Latin America is not seen that way, but, like, Western nations enforcing capitalistic models, whether it be, like, Catholic values and evangelical values. One of the things that they always get bring up, including the document, has been environmental responsibility. So do you think it's really the responsibility of underdeveloped nations who barely use their natural resources to curtail natural consumption, like oil or coal? Or is it more the responsibility of developed nations that already abuse the environment to curtail it, like the United States and Europe?
Well, ain't that $1 million question, and the one that stops every round of any kind of WTO negotiations, right? Who's responsible, right? Whether or not it is the developed world that got us into this mess, as you know, the BRICS countries would say, or is it the end? Or should we now all of a sudden disperse equally? It's a very good question, and I'm afraid, like, I personally definitely, even professionally, didn't give you the answer.
Again, I can't possibly answer that question better than anybody else, but one thing I found, when the congressional debate was happening here at Mercyhurst University, I don't know how many of you were here for that, but one of the questions that were asked of both candidates was, you know, what about pulling out of the Paris Climate Accords, and do we not have a responsibility to lead in this area of environmental stewardship? And I found that Congressman Kelly's response was a curious one to me, and inconsistent with his party's otherwise platform. And he said that this is not the job of the United States to lead on these issues, when in fact almost every single conservative and libertarian I know would actually argue that it is the job of the United States, in a way that would kind of counter what you just said, to actually lead in all things, whether it's economic development, whether it's military, the promotion of democracy and liberty, And so I found that to be remarkably inconsistent, that the one thing that we have to have without which we're all dead, anybody would dare say we dare not be a leader on this one. And I think that, so I can give you my personal subjective opinion, that it is the responsibility of those who are polluting the most to step up and to lead because of what we have contributed to the dissolution of this planet.
Yeah, just to add to that, Luis, the Laudato Si, which was Pope Francis' document on the environment, he brings up his grave concern is how much overdevelopment, without question, impacts the poor. You know, we place factories, and anywhere we're overdeveloping, we make sure that the rich are doing okay, and the poor usually suffering the most. So when the church thinks about the moral culpability around development, I suspect it's not pointing the first fingers at the nations that are struggling for the basic necessities. You know, it's, those of us who have too much already have a great moral weight upon us.
I'll contribute. He's looking at me. So, in terms of economic theory, this is how, again, it's not right or wrong. The truth is that, as you probably have or remember from your classes, pollution is considered an externality. If you are actually paying for it, you wouldn't pollute as much. But normally companies do not pay for that pollution. That's why it's called externalities outside the realm of how they measure their profits. So normally the way people say we should deal with it is by internalizing that externality, making companies that are producing pollution to actually pay for that pollution. That would make companies more efficient, because in order to remain profitable, they will have to find other ways to become efficient and lower the cost of production, or their profits would actually go down. So one way in which we can actually share this is that in advanced economies, there are more resources that can be invested in the creation and development of new technologies, new ways of producing, that could actually be more safe for the environment. The point would be that if these companies manage to do that, then they should share those technologies with those countries that are still developing. That way, those countries don't have to spend so much on the development of clear or clean technologies. They can actually adopt these new technologies and manage to grow too. So that way we can both develop and developing countries share a technology that benefits everybody. That could be a way in which we can do this. So I'm not saying who should pay for it. I'm saying there could be solutions. The issue is that if you're a company that actually developed the technology first and actually reduce the cost of production by doing so, you're not going to want to share with everybody, because that makes you more profitable. So by making yourself more profitable, if you share it, you make them profitable and your profits go down. So companies are unlikely to be willing to do this. So we would need maybe the government, maybe international institutions to actually promote this. Maybe the World Bank could actually do something.
And there's this thing called emissions trading, right? Also,
Other questions?
I wonder if you could say a little bit more about the charity example, because you know, when we looked at in the scenario, it would be a zero sum, like if somebody's charity is going to cause suffering for somebody else, farmer, but maybe the theory could offer some insight here too, but is it possible that to provide material goods to knock back hunger, starvation, might actually be have a cost, like the hemp farmers business, that while you know it's not great, but in the short term is somehow part of the process of providing immediate food for people who are starving. So, and I think that this emphasis, you know, the policy person.
I can say a little bit more about what I meant by charity. So when Thomas Aquinas talks about charity, he's talking about what we would say is love, or agape. So unconditional regard for the total well-being of yourself and other people, the command of Christ, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. The big question among many Christian theologians is, well, how in the world do you ever live out that love or the charity commandment? So I don't mean charity in the small sense of just giving you something that you need, like money or food, but that charity, the love commandment, would include all of those things. And so, you have a Protestant philosopher, Kierkegaard, who says it is the obligation of every church and every Christian to simply go inside, pray in your closet, open the door, and the first person that you meet, you shall love that person, and you get out of the way, no special relationships. And while Aquinas and Kierkegaard never met, obviously centuries apart, Aquinas disagreed with that model and said, no, love is a relational state. So I can't say that I love you unless I'm actually in a relational state with you, of giving you unconditional regard for your total well-being, and that if we are going to share that love commandment with each other, that's going to be a reciprocal relationship between the two of us. So I appreciate that insight from Aquinas that love has to mean something, and it actually means an actionable state of relating to somebody. And that's what leads me to think that a localized model of church, which does not mean that the church would not be regional, national, or international, but if we took a look again at what women religious are doing in their local, areas, is they're looking at what is needed here, what can they provide, how can they reach out to help other people to connect in relational models with those in need, and then we can still strategize about great needs in the world where local options, as I said at the end, are simply not present. Of course, if we can help in a real relational way, then let's do so, but I'm a bit more convinced by starting local, not starting top down, and then with the suggestion that you said about how might a chicken farmer, work that out. That the economists could say, I don't know. But my sense is that we work it out on a local level in communion with other local bodies, and that would probably be, in my imagination, a better way of taking care of the needs of the world.
And the interesting part about this is that there's a lot of new practices in development. So since the critique of this big system of development came into being, there's been a lot of shift in focus and rethinking of how we actually do this. So you might notice more and more at Christmas time, you get these little packages that tell you buy a cow for somebody or buy chickens for somebody, right? Or donate money specifically to a person. And some research shows that it actually works way better because you're eliminating middlemen, you're eliminating the levels of corruption. And who then, the person that needs that money, who needs that resource, better to tell them how to spend it than they themselves. Granted, people will spend things differently, right? There's a whole literature out there on how women and men spend differently, right? Therefore, there's a big push of investing in women, right? Because if you give them money, they go and invest in their communities instead of buying toys. Sorry. But, right, there is that research that backs that statement up. So yeah, it's about localizing that aid, but not only in the sense of where it's coming from, but who the recipients are. So you can eliminate a little bit of that middleman. So like with the charities and why it's so tragic, if you think about everybody knows the story of Tom's, right? And why there is a bit of a tragedy. I mean, Tom's are cool shoes, and they tell you, yeah, we'll provide a pair of shoes for the kid in need for the rest of their life. But the thing is that, right, you just made that kid dependent on your donation for the rest of your life, and you probably destroyed somebody's cobbler's business that could have been making those shoes and selling, because again, you can't compete with free. So, charities they're hard to talk about, because you're right, heart is in the right place, but the execution not always.
From a Catholic perspective, part of the question of charity is you can't just retreat to your chamber to debate political and economic theory while people remain hungry and naked and such. So, there's always been the both and. I think of the quirky and wonderful example of the Catholic worker movement in the U.S., which was responding in very real ways to the immediate needs of people in the breadlines and people who are suffering at the hands of this rapid industrialization I talked about earlier. But in the meantime, they're publishing ideas and they're having really engaged dialogue about what do we do and looking out for the rights of workers. So the Catholic, not to oversimplify, but the Catholic approach to charity is always both and, responding to the immediate needs, but that's not enough. At its worst, the Catholic Church has often stopped at charity, said we gave our money, we've done our thing, and we can go on with a comfortable life now. I appreciate Dr. McCarty's critiques earlier. The Church really is that much more embodied way of living out the economics that it claims people should be living by.
So here comes the agent of two. Charity is supposed to be, I guess it's supposed to be like an individual decision. Therefore, it's part of microeconomics. And in microeconomics, by definition, and this is still true about the basic microeconomic theory. On the fringe, there are studies that are challenging this theory, like behavioral economics, but microeconomics itself assumes, like I mentioned, that we are selfish. So if I'm selfish, and number two, I'm a consumption machine, because we assume that the only source of satisfaction is consumption, then I'm never going to participate in charity. That has been challenged, because there's people that participate in charity, people that help others. But the economic theory, again, would say that the only reason why you help others is because you get pleasure from helping. But I don't know how much pleasure you will get if you don't know the other person. So there are many things that we can actually extend this theory to include, including giving selfishly to other people, because I get satisfaction from giving people to other, giving things to the other people. Now is the do. I do believe that charity helps. I do believe that change at the local level, communities will help more than anything, because it will educate citizens, it will educate all of us as part of this world, and would help us understand that we have to look for the common good. But I do believe that international institutions, or at least our national institutions, could make change faster and stronger for everybody that small charities or small governments could. What I'm talking about is big government, in fact, has done things in the past that actually have helped the majority of the population. I just use an example because it has been statistically proven that is true. That when we actually started to create a redistribution through taxes, a progressive tax system, and if we use those extra revenues, meaning we tax the rich more than we tax the poor, if we actually use those revenues to in fact help the poor, not only the poor benefits, the society as a whole would benefit. How does that work? The idea is that as we provide education, as we provide health to the poor, those individuals will become more productive. And as our workers become more productive, our economy grows, which helps everybody. But that's not what we have been practicing lately. We, in fact, have been doing the opposite. Since the 1980s, we created supply-side economics that I mentioned, and we actually created a regressive tax system. When suddenly we keep reducing the tax rate that those with a higher level of income would have to pay. The idea was to, they say, to take away resources that would be used to help the poor. But in reality, it's just the rich didn't want to pay taxes, just like nobody wants to pay taxes, but they have more political power to influence the political system. So the whole idea of this was, there were statistical studies after it was tried, after the economic theory was tried, that showed that these tax cuts do not work, that supply-side economics, trickle-down economics, don't work. So why do we keep implementing this? Why do we just solve it again? And the predictions were true. They predicted that we were going to have a $1.5 trillion increase in our national debt. And who's going to finance that? Well, us, because we all are going to be paying taxes for those individuals that we see keep getting all the income and all the wealth. So my point is, again, yes, local communities would help, but we can make more change. We can actually impact more if we actually change the system, if we actually change our political system, if we change our economic system, then it will be easy to impact more people than just at the local level.
Let me just add one more thing. You brought up something really cool there. The relationship between political and economic system. So remember how earlier I said that there's a connection that we sort of assumed the market and democracy go hand in hand. They do, but the research shows, and we have tons of research on this for the last 100 years, definitely last century, that shows us that the laissez-faire market, this trickle-down economics, does not work in democracy. If anything, it erodes it, right? Very famous statement from Barrington Moore, no middle class, no democracy. That is proven to be almost an iron law in comparative politics. You don't have a middle class, you forget about democratic representation, forget about democratic institutions, it's gone, it's out of the window. There's plenty of reasons for it.
I didn't hear the phrase structural injustice, but I've heard it, I believe, when we're talking about, we do have to get local, I think that's absolutely important, but we have, even in our own country today, terrific structural injustice, tax system is one of them. So, does anybody want to, like Richard, you were talking about radical charity, it sounded to me as you pushed it, that
Yeah, no, absolutely. And one of the aspects is I'm not opposed to trying to solve some of our problems with federal and or state governments. I think that that's only right. I mean, we can only do it that way. The problem is, and you were touching on it, is now people, especially at the federal level, they don't represent me. These are people because of very complex, I mean, the trickle-down economics or the gerrymandering that's occurring. They don't represent me. They don't represent the communities I'm a part of. They represent a very different group of people who are then making decisions at federal or state levels about local issues that you would expect if a local person could really go to Congress, right? And they could be there to talk about what's happening here, then I think all of that would work. So the structural injustice is now, because of what we've heard about in the 80s, that actually led to what is now really kind of an oligarchy that's taken place. Not to say that some of the wealthy aren't kind and generous, but when you see the policies that keep being directed away from those most in need, then the very systems that could be helping us and have helped us are broken, which kind of leads you to feel a bit paralyzed to say, well, what can I do except for I know what I can do here. So in the face of structural injustice, I don't say, well, the hell with it, I'm just going to watch the Republic burn someday, and I think we probably will. But, you know, what can you do right now? You can do locally.
So it's getting late, and I'm going to ask just one sort of wrap-up question for the panel that you all have been sort of getting at from various angles. What would an economic development with a focus on rights look like in practice?
Revolution? No, I'm not joking. I mean, how to address, you know, what Dr. Snyder just said. I mean, it's, if we really were concerned about human rights in our economy, we would have to completely rethink, if we kept capitalism, we'd have to rethink what that looked like. We'd have to rethink and make some common commitments on the local, state, and federal level about really how much I can have for what I need to invest in my life and my family's life, and then how much I don't need to be redistributed. All those things, I think it would be a call to revolution, I really do.
I'm going to retreat to the local level on that question. One thing I've thought about a lot in preparation for this is what has stuck in me. I can't get rid of the Wall Street report from 2017 that Erie is the worst city in the United States to be black in. That, well, what are these? I've got the statistics with me. In the city itself, 12% of white people are in poverty, while 47% of black people are in poverty. So I sit with that and I say that to me is an ethical and a religious concern for me as a Catholic. And I think what does it take, at least in our level, to say, okay, when we look at is it just for Erie to have its own separate governmental tax system, while Mill Creek, Fairview, Hard Creek, and surrounding areas? You know, I think there's serious questions at our local level about how have we chosen to distribute things that allow for some children to be in a much more challenged environment for their schooling, for their neighborhoods, for all the basic measures that we would look at the very basic level of development. Would you feel safe when you walk outside and you walk fed? These questions, to me, are deeply religious, problematic ones. And I think the right people coming together creatively, there are solutions there, at least. I'm going to leave it to other scholars to talk about the more global questions.
I'm going to be positive this time. And actually, economic theory, like I said, actually assumes all the time that we're selfish, and it's only through selfishness in a free market that society is based on. Then, lately, especially since the 1940s, on the fringes, like it was not mainstream economic theory, but they started to prove. And actually, there's a movie, watch it, and in the movie they mention something similar to this, A Beautiful Mind, where they actually criticizing Adam Smith, because the idea is that society is best off, not when we're looking for our own interest, but when we look for our own interest and the interest of everybody. So the common good, if we actually learn about the common good, if we start to value the common good, and that could happen through education. If we include these topics into our educational system, people will learn about them and practice them. And if we actually start to do that, then we could create in the US. We don't have to make what's called the black, we don't have to invent the wheel. We can actually look at other countries like Norway or Iceland, when in fact their political system, their tax system, their capitalism works in a way that everybody benefits. Definitely benefit more than we benefit here. But that's part of their education. Nobody likes, for instance, to pay taxes. There are studies that show that even people in Norway don't like paying taxes. But they're more willing to do it because they see the result of it. They see actually that not only they will benefit, but their children benefit, their society, their economy, their community is the one that benefits. But that's educational, I believe. Maybe our economic theory is reflecting how we are educated, that we're meant to be selfish. But they're taught that you have to care about yourself. True, that's very important. But also you have to care about others. And if we actually do that, then we can change the system. So it's kind of a revolution, but a different kind of revolution.
So, Dr. Arges basically took a lot of words right out of my own mouth. That at the end talked exactly about that sort of self in a larger community. And yeah, it's definitely could be a revolution. I wonder to what degree that was the entire point of this document, right? Sort of very gentle, very firm though, almost call to arms in some degree, right? As in, it ain't right. We need to start thinking very carefully and not just from, our own moral standards, but within the scope of the faith as well.
So I want to thank the panelists for this evening, and I want to thank all of you for joining us. It's been an excellent discussion. I appreciate all of your attention. Have a lovely, lovely evening.